Hello, welcome to Madison Avenue Baptist Church's Roundtable on Race. My name is Cheryl Sims, and I'm on the board of fellowship at Madison. As a diverse community of faith, we want to lead the way in facilitating talks about race and racism in America, especially in light of the recent events that have sparked so many protests and have people crying out for change. So, our church set up this site where each Friday you can check out the links for resources that we hope will foster discussions about race, including videos that spotlight people of color from our own congregation. These members share their stories about racial experiences they had while growing up and how their faith helped them deal with those experiences, as well as their hopes for younger generations. So today, it is my turn to be in the spotlight. I hope that by sharing my story, it will inspire you to have conversations about the problems that people of color face in our country on a daily basis and what can be done to bring people together and make life better for all of us. So, I want to start my story by sharing a little background about my family. I grew up in a family that had six kids in it, and I was number five. My father was in the military, so we moved around a lot. At times, we lived in all black neighborhoods, and other times, we lived in predominantly white neighborhoods. Well, nowadays, a black family living in a white community won't raise an eyebrow, but I was born during Jim Crow time. So it was a huge deal for a black family, especially one as big as ours, to live among white people. Growing up, I didn't experience as much overt racism as my parents did. They had to experience a lot of discrimination on their jobs. Even my father, despite the fact that he was a soldier, had to deal with racism on a regular basis. My brothers and my sister, um, they had to contend with people calling them names and chasing them and things like that. I didn't have to go through much of that, mostly because I was born towards the end of Jim Crow time, and as my parents, they did a great job of shielding me from a lot of the ugly parts of racial tensions that were spewing across the country during my formative years. So, be that as it may, I still was made aware of the difference in races, though, when I was 2 years old. It happened because I was living in Bed-Stuy here in Brooklyn at the time, and we had just moved from Colorado, so new neighbor or whatever. We ended up living next to a white family that had a little girl. And so she was a little bit bigger than me, so she probably was about maybe 4 or 5 years old. And she and I were playing in front of our respective, in front of our houses on our respective stoops when she asked to play with me. Um, so we were having fun playing together when my father came home and saw us playing. And he told my mother to call me in the house. And my parents, when I got in the house, they were arguing about whether or not I was old enough to have the talk. The talk being that about race. My father said yes, my mother said no. Guess who won that argument? They tried to explain to me that it wasn't safe for me to play with white kids. But at the age of two, the only thing I really understood about that conversation was that my friend was being taken away from me. And my friend was being taken away from me, which for because why? Because her skin was super light. This was something that was confusing to me. I didn't understand it, and I was not happy. But I didn't dare show my displeasure because my father was a sergeant in the army, and he ran his household the way that he ran his unit. So I had to just deal with it. So after that, I learned to be more cautious when I was out and about in white neighborhoods. But being constantly the new kid on the block meant I was always looking for friends. I was always in friend making mode. So I still played with white kids, but I did it on the down low. By that I mean I would play with my friends after school until it was time for my father to come home from work. I would make a beeline to my house, sit in the kitchen with my school books, and pretend that I had been there studying the whole time when he pulled his car into the driveway. I'm sure my mother knew what I was up to, but she never said anything. By the time I reached my teens, I fully understood why my parents were having that talk with me when I was two. Um, they were trying to let me know that that people can get ugly at times. You know, they can do things, say things that hurt you because of the color of your skin. At the age of two, I didn't understand that, but by the time I got to be a teen, you know, I started to experience racism on a regular basis. Not so much a regular basis, but it's something that was more directed at me on a personal level that I started to understand exactly where they were coming from. So my my mother had taught me another important lesson though, not just to be careful when I was in white society, but also my mother taught me to lean on God whenever I was faced with adversity. And that advice came in handy because the older I got, the more experience of discrimination I felt like um, things like racial profiling for being in a neighborhood that people thought that I shouldn't be in, or hearing the N word being thrown my way or being followed around in stores, things like that were happening a lot. So I found myself praying to God a lot. Um, Racial disparity, though, was a bigger problem in my mind than the type of in your face calling you name type of hate, because the effects of subverted racism is much more long lasting. So an example of that is when I was growing up in school. I'm sorry, when I was just growing up, um, tracking existed in a lot of the schools, both in the North and in the South. But the difference was that tracking in places like New York City meant that minority kids were in abundance in both the honor classes and the lower level classes because the schools were segregated there. I mean, if you got segregated school, then you know it doesn't matter. You have upper or lower classes. Everybody's gonna still be a minority, right? Or all white if it was a white school. But in places like South Carolina, where there was a mandate to desegregate schools, the high level classes were mostly white students, and the lower level classes were mostly populated with minority students. So even though the schools were desegregated, the classes were not. And the quality of education given to the higher and lower classes had a huge disparity. So this became a problem for me when I transferred from a school in New York to South Carolina. The school in South Carolina assigned me to low level classes, despite the fact that my transcript showed that I had been in high honor classes when I was in New York. It was clear that the administrators of the school that they only saw that this new kid standing before them was a black kid. And so they were going to put me where they normally put black kids, which was in the low level classes. They weren't interested in assessing me, my level of education to find out what I knew, what I would be capable of learning. And they didn't hear me when I was trying to tell them about the classes I had been in and why I didn't want to be placed in low level classes. Um, Needless to say, um, I was afraid I was going to get stuck in the lower level classes, which would have been devastating to me because I had aspirations of becoming a science teacher as young as being in junior high school. So I did what my mother taught me, which was I prayed. Um, Next thing I knew, my classes got changed, and yes, I eventually became a science teacher. But imagine if I would have got stuck in those level of classes, how different my life would have been. I thank God every day that that didn't happen to me. So I believe that the way that we make change, effective change, when it deals with race and race relations, is for us to be able to see one another. For example, several years ago, I participated in an outward bound expedition here in New York City called "What You Don't Know Can Hurt You." It involved backpacking with a diverse group of people from across the country, and we had to maneuver difficult obstacles in small groups, sometimes in pairs. The real challenge of that course, though, was for people to be able to meet these challenges with people they ordinarily wouldn't associate with in society. So, my partner was a middle aged white man from Oregon. And he confessed at the end of the session that he was uncomfortable at the start of this program having me as a partner because he had bad experiences with black people in the past. But after he got to know me, his anxiety subsided, and he appreciated how I helped him get through the course. And I had to see him too, though, because at first I recognized that he was like having hangups about being partners with me. And all I could think of was, okay, here we go, another white man afraid of a black person. But soon I had to learn to look past that and see that he was somebody who needed my help. So we ended up at the end of the course mutually respecting one another, and it was all because we learned to see one another. So, what do I hope for my nephews and future generations? That people will be able to see them as individuals and appreciate the knowledge and skills that they bring to a community. I'm not just talking about white people seeing colored people. I'm also talking about colored people seeing white people too. Um, but in order for people of different races to see one another, they have to have opportunities to interact with each other. So that's why I advocate for more diverse schools so that children from different backgrounds can learn to play together at a young age. And hopefully, they will take that knowledge of what it's like to be around people that are different and take it with them when they go to work, when they get older, and stuff like that. And race won't be a big deal. But I also think the other place that we need to have more diversity is in places of worship. Too many places of worship are segregated communities of faith. And I don't mean segregated as far as we're only Baptist or we're only Jewish or something like that. I mean that within those faiths, then people are segregated, like all black here, all Asian here, all white here. I think that we need to have more diversity in institutions. That's one of the things I love about Madison, by the way, is that it is a diverse place. Um, so I think that we need diversity in more places of faith so that people can learn to pray together and that we can learn to support one another and love our neighbors as ourselves. Sound familiar? Um, God made this world. He made it diverse. Who are we to say that diversity is a bad thing? So, if we develop a society where people truly see one another, then young people, like my nephews, will not be followed around in stores anymore. They won't be racially profiled by the police anymore. I want you to know this. I see you. God sees you. God sees me. The question is, do you see me too? May God bless you and keep you safe. Thank you for listening.